If you're looking for some experimental approaches to storytelling and trying to connect rather disparate lives, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I will be looking at Ali Smith's How to Be Both. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we'll be looking at a novel that actually was on New York Times list of 100 best books of the 21st century. To be fair, it was 99th on that list, but I think making any book on that list would make it worth a read. And the nature of it just kind of appealed to me when I saw what it was about, and so I decided to crack it open. And I was definitely intrigued by the approach of this book, although it did also have a few drawbacks. Just to give you an idea, book, I mean, it's focused on really pushing the boundaries of traditional storytelling in some respects. It does rely on some stream of consciousness, but the whole point is that it has this split between it. And one half of the book is telling the story of one character in contemporary modern times, and then the other one is telling the story of an artist in Renaissance Italy. So that is meant to give you this contrast, hence the name, How to Be Both. And it just gives two pretty different styles of writing that make it, like I said, very experimental on the one hand, but on the other hand, it just really provides an opportunity to reflect on our approaches to dealing with life and the challenges of life. So the two intertwined storylines, just to give you a recap, you have the one following the life of Francesco del Cosa. Like I said, he's a 15th century Italian fresco painter. And the other one focuses on a young girl. Oh, I think she's 11 or 12, I forget the exact age. Her name is George, and she is dealing with the recent death of her mother, and that takes place in modern day England. And of course, the twist is that depending on the edition of the book that you pick up, these two storylines are presented in different orders. So some readers will begin with Francesco's story, while others will start with George's. I started with George's, and I think I preferred it that way, but I'll never know because I can only read a book for the first time once. And of course, this deliberate narrative choice, I mean, it really invites the reader to just experience the story from different angles. It really alters their perception based on where they begin. And it's an incentive to just have a daring approach to storytelling that I would say reflects on the novel's central theme of duality, and especially this overlap between the past and the present, and of course this overlap between art and life and the struggles of life. Some people, from what I saw, argued that they felt like, despite the fact it's two very different storylines, that she did a great job at weaving together these two disparate lives seamlessly. I would argue to the contrary. I actually thought that one of the challenges of the book was that it was so distinct, and that the connections were sometimes really tentative. And so sometimes I'd find myself thinking, wait, why did we switch to the Renaissance, even though there was this justification for it based off the first part of the book, but it was still just kind of hard to fully appreciate it at times. That being said, I really enjoyed the contrast. Francesco's story, I mean, it's told in this vivid stream of consciousness style that really helps to immerse the reader in the world of Renaissance Italy. While George's, on the other hand, I mean, her narrative it's much more grounded in contemporary realism, and it deals much more with trying to figure out the feelings of a young girl who's gone through a great loss, which for a lot of reasons can be a really difficult thing to vocalize and to put into understandable thought. And so I would say that even though they're very different writing styles and it's not always fully understood how well they're connected, I would say that through these parallel narratives, Smith really creates a poignant exploration of how art transcends both time, and how human experiences, though separated by centuries, are fundamentally alike in many ways. Of course, the novel's prose are another highlight of this book. I mean, Smith's signature lyrical and inventive writing style is in full display in both styles, and her playful use of language really adds this layer of meaning, and it just draws the reader into the emotional lives of both the characters. So both storylines are filled with rich and evocative descriptions that bring their respective worlds to life, whether it's painstaking detail about fresco painting or just the quiet moments of the grief and the contemplation in George's life. I've already said this before, you know, despite all the brilliance of this structure, it can be a little confusing, especially due to just that abrupt shift between the two narratives. And the novel doesn't follow a straightforward path. And so the sudden transition from one storyline to the other, I mean, it can really leave readers disoriented, especially if they're expecting more of a traditional structure. So beware, that is one thing that you have to keep in mind as you're reading this book. And so that lack of clear division and justification for that switch can really just make it so that it can blur the lines between the past and the present, and it really can leave some readers, not me, because I fully understood everything at every time, to piece together, some of the connections themselves. It would be fascinating to hear from some people that read the Francesco story first, because I really am curious about how reading George's story first affected me, and knowing that that is one of the surprising elements of the publication of this book. It would really just make it an engaging conversation with someone that did do that version of the book, to see where we might have similar thoughts or where things might be different. Of course, which story came first can really set the scene for how you are interpreting this book and what you think the value of this book is. And so that is something that I would definitely like to have more engagement with, if there's anybody out there who would like to have a larger discussion on reading Francisco's story first versus George's story first. I'd have to say, ultimately, How to Be Both is a novel that demands close attention, but I do think it also rewards careful reading. I mean, it's not the kind of book that offers an easy answer or a tidy resolution by any stretch of the imagination. But in some ways, that's part of the charm, because when you're dealing with your struggles, especially over grief, understanding that you're not always going to have good resolution is something that I know can be challenging, but it can also be the thing that gives you just that little bit of hope, knowing that not only is it not easy, but a lot of people have to sort that out. And so if they can do it, you can too, even if at the moment it's really hard for you to fully figure out your remorse and fully figure out how you're ever going to deal with such deep feelings of loss and of confusion and pain. I would say Ali Smith really creates a novel that reflects the complexity of life itself. I mean, this messy, non-linear, and it's full of contradictions. I mean, even though you have this abrupt transition there that may confuse some, I would say the beauty of it is not just in its language, but in its depth, in its effort to try to help us engage with the past to better understand the present, in one way using very different individuals, different stages in life, different times in world history, different places in the world, and yet you can still see similarities, and you can still see what draws people together, and the ability to grasp and deal with and process our emotions. Who would I say this is for? Well, if you are excited for the elements of it that are a little more experimental, then this may appeal to you. Also, if you are looking for a book that just gives you some insight on the human condition and what it takes to overcome a real tragedy, especially for someone that's really young and then has no idea, no language, no concept, no prior experiences to know how to deal with something like this, and how that can be tied to the larger human experience, in which you will then jump to a very different time and place, then this would be for you. And I realize that might sound like a lot of different caveats, but as a whole, I would say anyone that is interested in exploring the human condition, that is willing to deal with some experimental elements, I think this book is for you. It's not too terribly long of a book, and I definitely found the conversations and the explorations of feelings in it something worth doing. Who is this not for? I would say someone that does not find themselves frequently considering how they could engage more with their emotions, or considering what it's like to deal with your emotions when it comes to maybe not just a great loss necessarily, but just a major transition, or something that just makes it harder for you to understand the world in which you live, and understanding that if you can grasp that, or if you can deal with that, you are connecting with experiences since the beginning of time, because that is not new. And I think that that's one of the greatest manifestations of art, is showing us how little we've changed over time. Because no matter how much technology we have, no matter how many things change in terms of urbanization and building up new empires and civilizations and what have you, the bottom line is we're all dealing with essentially the same emotions. And I think that the art is a great reflection of that. And I think that this book is a good representation of that. So if you're not interested in those things, then this book is not going to be for you. Of course, I am definitely interested in what you guys have to say. Please let me know in the comments, but don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.